Ladies and gentlemen, it is 1 a.m. here. I finally got my daughter to bed. I did all my recording and I was about to pour myself a drink and go to bed when I got a notification that the IDF had released footage from inside the Al Shifa hospital. This is one of the most contentious battles of the war so far. And it's not about the actual battle for the hospital. It's about what's really happening inside, right? The battle is here in the media and information landscape. So the IDF has released a 7-minute, what they say is an unedited footage of one building of the Al Shifa hospital that they say proves that Hamas has been using the hospital as a military headquarters. Well, I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and we are going to break down this video, and I'm going to try to size up, at least from what I know about insurgencies, right, from my combat deployment in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban. We're going to size up if this, what the reality on the ground is, right? Let's get into it. You're watching this, by the way, along with me. So this is going to be like real time. So if it sounds a little improvised or a little, this or that, bear with me. Okay.
Shalom everyone, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan from the IDF here. I am in the Shifa hospital, as you can see from the sign behind me, and as you can clearly see from the building. We are going to do a one-shot video. One shot, no editing, of all of the evidence that we have found just now in this building of the Shifa hospital.
Okay. First off, I want to point out this is actually, if you've been following my channel, you know this has been one of my criticisms of the IDF's information efforts, is that they release highly edited videos that show very little about the nature or substance of the operations. And while we understand the need to preserve operational security, the IDF is starting to realize that the information space, right, your opinion is very important. Right? The international community's opinion about what's going on is really important. And if the IDF is doing the right things, right, looking out for civilians, trying to be discretionary with their targets for airstrikes and heavy artillery, so to speak, it's important to communicate that to the international community, right? Look again at the Ukraine conflict in the early days, right? The number one thing that Zelensky did in those first, 2 months of the conflict was communicate to the international audience that Ukraine could resist the Russians and that they needed assistance. And when the general public believed it, the politicians who want to win elections followed suit. And so I think the fact that Israel has recognized that, hey, we need to do some unedited footage. You notice this is the first time I've seen an IDF footage from this war that has a soldier naming himself at all, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan, which is also interesting because, in the U.S. military, right, like Jonathan is a first name, and I would never dream of calling a lieutenant colonel by their first name. But again, I think this is smart. It's a human face to the IDF. Now, again, is it propaganda? Well, yes, of course, right? Like all of this, Hamas releases their videos and it's propaganda, but it can also be true. Does that make sense? All right, let's get into it. Okay, so I want to point out that clearly the hospital has had some strikes very near it, but the interior does appear largely intact, right? You notice that the plaster is on the walls. Even some of the glass in these cabinets is intact. Even this paper on these buildings are up. So it's highly unlikely that even if it would be hard to stage this, like very hard to convincingly get, again, paper signs up and all this sort of thing.
So we're inside the MRI center of the Shifa hospital. Israeli troops breached here a few hours ago, and we have cleared the area, make sure that it's safe. And a few of the most interesting things that we have found totally confirm, without any doubt, that Hamas systematically uses hospitals in their military operations in violation of international law. And what we have found, I think, is only the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, so I want to acknowledge, again, there's like appropriate and inappropriate. it would be totally appropriate, at least by US understandings of the law of war, um, that if you were going to clear a hospital building that was used, or a mosque, for example, if it was used to like engage US troops had no choice but to enter and clear it, right? Like we entered and cleared hospitals that we knew the Taliban had been operating in. Um, it it would be completely normal for us to go through every single room, to check every closet, to do, and generally there were not patients in the hospitals. Usually they were clinics, right? A hospital of this scale I didn't encounter. I was in a very rural part of the country. We rarely saw clinics with like patients, like critically ill, seriously ill patients. Almost never were in these clinics. um but we would, within reason, search everywhere that someone could be hiding, or where there could be a trap or an explosive device planted to hit an unsuspecting US soldier. And so sometimes that meant, right, checking doorways, it meant opening closets. Did that mean that we ransacked the place? No. We weighed the threat of an IED against the need to respect this other country that we were in.
Let me show you a few examples. Security cameras have been obstructed. All of the security cameras are covered, and this isn't the only one. You'll see the rest of them here. Follow me as we go in, and we will see the MRI center and see the weapons that Hamas has hidden inside. This is where patients come in order to get MRI services. We'll proceed into...
Okay, so this looks like this could be searching. This, because you notice these walls are intact, but the roof itself is not. And so it looks as though maybe the IDF like got on a ladder and removed some of these tiles, but that doesn't look like a person removing it. It could also be an airstrike that hit nearby that sort of or hit the roof and kind of knocked these down. I could see something like that.
This is where patients come in order to get MRI services.
But you notice here's some explosive damage on this door. So that says, you notice how it's the explosives are curved inward, right? So this door was closed, and it looks like the IDF had to breach it, right? Here's where the breaching charge would have been, right? You can see how if you close the door, this all lines up, right? So they clearly had to breach this door. It was locked. And my understanding, someone in the comments can let me know, is that MRI machines, because they are so sensitive, they oftentimes have to be in enclosed rooms. I know X-rays, for example, have to be in like lead-lined rooms. So just because this door is big and heavy, there could be a medical reason for it being closed and being a very heavy-duty door.
Proceed into a more secluded area. And the lighting here is out, so we're using flashlights. We're now, as you can see, in an MRI room. I don't know when this was used the last time. but it is definitely an MRI machine. And if you follow me behind the MRI machine, I'll show you what our troops exposed just minutes ago. In military terms, this is a grab bag, grab and go of a Hamas combatant. And if you zoom in and we get some light over here, what you will be able to see is military equipment. There is an AK-47, there are cartridges, ammo, there are grenades in here, of course uniform, and all of this was hidden very conveniently.
So my understanding, again, MRIs, right, magnetic resonance imaging, is that metal objects within the MRI machine and near it can throw it off. So I suspect that this had not been used for some time. And yeah, this is indeed like a cache that you would have a fighter that you would store, right? So a fighter can transition quickly into civilian clothes or from civilian to fighter. Very common. It was a staple tactic of like the Mahdi army in the Iraq War in the early 2000s, where their fighters would quickly be able to don black clothes, right? Get their weapons on and get out into the streets and start to fight. And then just as quickly change into civilian clothes and, masquerade or present as civilians.
Secretly behind the MRI machine. On the other side, we found a backpack with what appears to be very important intelligence, including a laptop, and we'll show you that momentarily. Let's go see the next room. So we're still in the MRI center. The backpack was found in here, and it was also hidden behind the MRI machine. As you
I want to know what all these bags are.
can see, the rest of the equipment here is proper hospital equipment, right? Bandages and medical gear. It seems as if there's no real shortage because there's a lot of equipment here, but we'll leave.
Well, okay, large unmarked bags. This is a I. So here's the thing. One, moving hospitals, moving any operation is really hard. In the U.S., in the military, we call it jumping talk when you move your headquarters or your main element, and it involves packing up everything you have to run, moving to a new place, and redeploying it. And oh yeah, you can't lose. You can't just stop commanding troops because you're moving. Well, think about those same problems for a hospital, right? You have to in a hospital in a war zone. This hospital has to pick up everything, move, right, to move all its patients, move most of its physicians, move most of its specialty diagnostics, move all of that to a safe location, right? And oh yeah, continue to provide care to patients as much as possible. And so it makes total sense that some equipment would get bagged for transport, some equipment, right? This is unlabeled. And so this is probably not it's not labeled, it's not organized. This probably wasn't being siphoned off for military purposes. My guess is that staff were probably packing up as many of their materials as they could, trying to keep them sterile, right? Because if packaging is, let's say, pierced by debris, then your bandages aren't sterile anymore. And they may have been preparing to move out of this area. So again, what I don't see anything necessarily that says that, oh, they hid medical supplies. And again, if you've been in a hospital, you know that or done any sort of logistics, right? There's always you're never short everything at the same time. You always end up critically short of like 3 very important things, and you have 100, a million of the things you don't need, right? Anybody that's done logistics, you guys can think, I'm sure 80% of you guys can think of the time at work where you didn't have the widget A that you needed, but you had 400 million of the stuff you didn't. So again, I wouldn't see this and say the hospital shortages were lies.
That for another discussion. Let's go see weapons and other prohibited items. As we walk through the main corridor here, our troops did a preliminary search of the area. We tried to uncover the cameras, but all of the cameras have been obstructed. You can see there's black tape covering it. And when our troops opened this closet here, which is in the main part of the clinic,
right. Again, this is standard stuff, searching for explosives or even hidden soldiers, right, waiting to ambush.
This is what they found. These weapons have absolutely no business being inside a hospital. The only reason they're here is because Hamas put them here, because they use this place, like many other hospitals and ambulances and sensitive facilities inside the Gaza Strip, for their illicit military purposes. So there's black.
Right, let's get a closer look here. Let's see if we can get this zoomed in. Let's see if we can get a zoomed in frame. Okay, there we go. All right, so here's what's interesting, right? You may be like, hey, where's the buttstock? You could see these are actually paratrooper, what look like AKMs, Soviet-made or clones of Soviet-made weapons, but they're meant to be compact. They were actually designed for paratroopers who need to keep their gear compact and light because they jump out of aircraft. But the Soviets developed this folding stock where you just unfold it and it clicks into place, and suddenly your AK is fully operational. It looks like these are pretty covered in dust, but you can see there looks to be at least, let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, and then another 4 here. So it looks like there's at least 8 AKs here. That's probably more, right? You know, you may be able to sit there and go, oh, the hospital needs security, right? And that's sort of true. But again, this is not where an office would store a security, right? You'd have a security office where these weapons would be. And 8 AK-47s is a preposterous amount, right? The US is not afraid to put guns in hospitals, and usually a hospital will have one, maybe two armed police officers on duty at any one time. And that's like a major urban hospital.
This is what they found. These weapons have absolutely no business being inside a hospital. The only reason they're here is because Hamas put them here, because they use this place, like many other hospitals and ambulances and sensitive facilities inside the Gaza Strip, for their illicit military purposes. So there's Kalashnikov rifles here, even ammunition. And let's go see the next part of what we have here. Another MRI machine. Another MRI machine where behind it we also found contraband similar to what you saw in the other areas. And let's go see the last thing, which is more related to intelligence, which I think we will be able to extract quite a lot of interesting intelligence from.
Right. And I want to point things out. Right now, this has demonstrated so far that this hospital was used to store some level of weapons, some level of fighters. But what we haven't seen is the headquarters. There's certain things that are the hallmark of a military headquarters that you would expect to see, that I'm expecting to see if this is true. And you know, hospital complexes are large. This is one building, you know, so and I generally believe, based on the constraints that Hamas operates under, that it is logical for them to use the hospital as a command post. But a command post is going to have, you're going to see maps, you're going to see radio equipment of some kind. You're basically going to see the tools needed to enable entire units to shoot, move, and communicate, right? So we've seen individuals need what they need to shoot, but you're going to see things like targets, like maps. You're going to see logistics of saying, hey, here's how we move weapon systems from person to person. Here's where our different units are located, and what armaments they have. Here's the status of casualties and who's deployed where. That's what I mean by like shoot, move. You're going to see things like routes, tunnels, maps, layouts. You're going to see timetables. Again, those could be written, those could be digital. You're going to see communication gear, right? That's a key one. You're going to see frequencies, communications, codes. So any of that is what we're looking for here for evidence that this was actually a command post and not just a series of caches.
If you can see, follow me. Up here, on top of a spare part of the MRI department, we found another grab bag. It's empty because we emptied it and cleared it so that we could use and see it. So this is where we found it, and here are the contents of the bag. The contents of the bag.
Okay, here's what's interesting. That bag was actually red. The other bag was black. I suspect not an accident.
Are full military.
Okay, so look here. Here's a plate carrier, right? A slick plate carrier, 3 mags, a grenade, 3 grenade pouches. We've got a set of shoes.
Kit for 1 Hamas terrorist, a live grenade, ammunition, fighting vest.
Oh, interesting. There's no plate in that plate carrier. Shit.
Insignia, boots, and of course uniforms. And last but not least, standard AK-47. Inside the hospital, hidden in a secluded area. Take a look at this door here. Blast-proof door, which is part of the clinic and part of the infrastructure of the hospital. Everything else looks like a hospital, only this part doesn't. Last part.
Again, you see the sign here. It could be a deception, but I think this is actually not alarming. And again, if you asked me, if you're like, hey, Paul, you've got to establish military operations inside a hospital. You've got to do it, right? Yeah, I would go to the MRI or the diagnostics area and find those lead-lined rooms, find those heavy doors, and that's where I would put my stuff, like, of course.
Last part. Now we will see something that our Intel researchers are looking into. Hold on, before we go on, let's have a look at what we found inside the very same cabinet that houses medical equipment. You can see all kinds of standard military medical stuff. We found another go-to bag, this bag here. And again, we opened it up in order to make sure that it's safe to touch and show. So please don't give.
Yeah, that's like we talked about earlier in the video. That is true. They have to do that. Super common tactic to plant explosives. We've seen it even in the Ukraine conflict where Russians, when they withdraw from an area, will leave like live grenades into bags and in containers and homes and doors. So very, very standard stuff. Yeah.
Give me any of that. You opened it up and you placed it there. This is the bag that we found, and this is the stuff that was in it. Now, there's insignia, military insignia, a knife. For those of you who read Arabic, you'll be able to understand what it says here. But it's Hamas, the military wing, Kataib al-Qassam, of course a vest with equipment, and as always, an AK-47, standard gear, grab and go, which they thought would be a good place to store inside a hospital. And the last item, which I'm sure will be very interesting to analyze, is a laptop. We found it in the MRI room. This is how the laptop looks. I don't know who it belonged to, but now it is being analyzed by our Intel people. Tactical radio communications, which we will analyze. Lots of disks, which will be analyzed. And
so here's what I think is interesting about the use of disks. Believe it or not, in the era of like signal intelligence, communicating over hardware, over CD-ROMs, can actually be pretty smart. Now, here's the thing to bear in mind. Yes, a radio, like this is a basic command setup, like extremely basic. A radio, the ability to reference a variety of things, right? Right. So these CDs could potentially contain the maps and references, and they simply may have a policy that says, "Hey, don't connect your laptop to the internet for any reason. Like remove the Wi-Fi, air gap it." So if you want to get a list of all your soldiers, they show up in these CDs. Totally possible. Right? A phone, a radio, a laptop. That's enough. Maybe not to command a large company, but enough to be a coordinator, right? Maybe not command, but definitely to exercise control over a platoon or company-sized element for sure, or to have a couple of squads that you coordinate. The ultimate problem, and they can't show it, right? Is that it's a hospital. This is also all things that you would see in a hospital, like staff. Lots of hospital staff carry radios to talk to each other. I mean, not in like a modern Western hospital, but absolutely plausible that the nursing station's going to have a laptop for tracking patient records and a phone, right? So the question is this actually a military? Is this a command center, or is it just routine hospital stuff?
Computer, which at first glance already provides a lot of incriminating evidence.
Interesting.
The war of competing.
So, wow. Okay, that was interesting. What we did see, I think this is pretty compelling evidence that Hamas is using the Al-Shifa hospital for military operations. Is it a headquarters? The evidence presented in that video did not indicate that. Now, there's lots of reasons for that could be possible, not the least of which is the fact that if you're Hamas and you know Israel's coming for the Al-Shifa hospital, you're going to pack up and move your stuff, just like the hospital had to pack up and move its stuff. Hamas, if it has a headquarters, is going to have to pack up and move it. But there should be some remnants. There should be some signs. And potentially that laptop could be one of those signs, right? So, again, the biggest takeaway I take away from this is actually how intact, relatively speaking, at least that building is. It's a sign to me that the Israelis are trying in at least some capacity to preserve the hospital infrastructure, right? They could have bombed that building. They didn't. And they've certainly not shied from targeting other medical facilities. So I hope in my heart that this sort of reflects a change in the Israeli perception of how they need to conduct operations, possibly as a result of international pressure, right? Like if if the international community's uh, um, distaste for the militarization of a hospital changed at least one of the side's policies about how medical facilities are used or targeted or engaged in this conflict, and that saved the lives of civilians, I'm all for it. Anyway, that's all I had, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know if there's other videos that you want me to check out. Thanks again, and have a good night.